actually comes from the root heel, like shoe heel. So basically, Ekev is like as a result of just a figurative language kind of. So it's a pretty interesting word. Comes from the word Ekev. It's also related to the name Yaakov. You remember Jacob, he was holding the heel of Esau. So it's just a pretty interesting word, fun facts. So today we're going to cover a few things related to the Parsha this week. We're going to cover covenants. We're going to cover Shema, Israel, Shema, and temple liturgy. We're going to cover what love actually means in Deuteronomy, and we're going to talk a little bit about the covenant. I did not put this slide for the blessing, so let's see the blessing, if you remember. So, Machut Adonai Borach, Baruch Adonai Baruch Shalom Ha'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'cholaנו ובעמים ונתננו את תורתו, Baruch Atah Adonai Notei haTorah. Alright, so the resources for today's class is going to be this book, Covenant, the history of a biblical idea. Very, very good, very short. So if you guys want a very short thing about covenants, it's really good. It's like this book. And then Deuteronomy 1 to 11 by Moshe Weinfeld. That was very long, very complicated. So, and then there's the theological things with the Old Testament. Really good too. And then some stuff from past teachings. You guys can get the Google Classroom to that group. And obviously, Rico teachings is pretty much who recommends all these books to us. Alright, so maybe we're going to start with a little quote of what is an ancient treaty or covenant. Or what does that mean? Because we throw out the word a lot and we use it a lot and we kind of understand what it means. But it's just good to put it into perspective. Basically, an ancient treaty is essentially an elaborate oath. Okay? So there's two fundamental components. The thing to be performed and the oath invoking of divine vengeance in the case of the promise not kept. Okay, so that's like the fundamental components of a covenant. So there's you have to do a thing, and then there's the oath. So an oath is like where you swear something and invoking divine vengeance in case you don't keep that covenant. So there's a lot of covenants in the Bible. This is kind of like the general ones, but there's a lot more. There's the Noah covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, there's the Aaronic covenant, the Davidic, and the New covenant, and a lot of others. This is obviously not a comprehensive list, but it's kind of like in general, very famous ones. So if you guys remember, we've talked about before how the ancient treaties or the suzerain vassal covenants, they're in general usually going to have 6 different components of them. So usually going to start off with a preamble. It's basically going to explain to the people who the suzerain is and why they should follow him, the historical prologue, and there's the stipulations, which is what they're supposed to do inside of this covenant, the provisions for the deposit of the text and public readings. So basically they would have two copies of the covenant, and they would have one in each of the temples of the main gods of the people in the covenant. Then they have the witnesses of the gods, and the curses and blessings. So if you break it down into Deuteronomy falls pretty close into these different components. And it's really, really cool how you see all these different components. And you read other covenants from ancient Near East, and you see a lot of parallels with them. Obviously, they're not identical, but there's a whole lot of parallels. And there's a lot to learn in comparing. So starting with the preamble is basically the suzerain presenting himself or introducing himself. This is an example from the Hittite treaty between Rashilis and Tubiteshub. Basically, if you read the quote, it's these are the words of son Rashilis, the king of the great king, the king of Hatti. Hatti is like the Hittite land. The valiant, the favorite of the storm god, the son of Shupiliumas. The great king, the king of Hatti, and the land and the valiant. It's really interesting because you see the first words. These are the words of son Rashilis. And then you see how Deuteronomy starts, and these are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel in the wilderness in the east of the Jordan. And this is actually why the book is called Devarim in Hebrew, because words in Hebrew is Devarim. So it will be Ele HaDvarim, these are the words. So it's literally in the name. It's pretty cool. Yes?
Really quick, so in like simpler words, what would you say a preamble is? A preamble is an
introduction? Yeah, like an introduction.
It's like a preamble.
It's kind of like the introduction.
Well, it's supposed to introduce the person that's making the treaty, the king.
Yes.
I would put it like that, the introduction for the king.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, so after the preamble, there's a historical prologue. So basically, the historical prologue, it recounts events and the relationship between the parties leading up to the moment of entering the covenant. There's an emphasis on the suzerain's kind and beneficial acts towards the vassal. And the main purpose of the historical prologue is to motivate vassals. Vassals is the underling, I guess you want to call it that, the person under, there's a suzerain, there's a vassal. So the main purpose of the historical prologue is to motivate the vassals to exhibit good behavior towards the suzerain. So it's basically like, if you want to think about it this way, the preamble is who, and the historical prologue is why, basically, who the person is and why you should follow them. And so again, another example from Hittite Treaty, between Tutahalia and Shawshagmua, contains a historical prologue. And it says, I, my majesty, have taken you, Shawshagmua, by the hand, and have made you my brother-in-law. In the past, in the land of Amuru had not been defeated by the force of arms. You get the idea. Basically, they're talking about the history of between those two people before they came to a covenant. So there's a lot of history in Deuteronomy. If you guys read the parasha from last week, there's a lot of historical. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But this is basically a small excerpt of the historical prologue in the Deuteronomy. So if you look at the historical prologue, it's going to be around from chapters 1:6 to chapter 4:40. If you read all of that, it's all historical things. And like a great example is when they were talking about the history of Sihon and Heshbon and how God helped Israel to defeat them, and that whole story. So if you guys want to read that little section on your own time, chapter 1 to chapter 4, you're going to see a lot of history in there. It's really cool. And then we have the stipulations. So stipulations is basically the Torah, basically like what are we supposed to do now that we know who the suzerain is, now that we know what the suzerain has done for us, so now that we know who he is, now that we know why should we follow him in the first place, thanks to the historical prologue, now the suzerain gives us his stipulations, or what we should do now that we're in covenant with him. So the specific obligations imposed on the vassal included the prohibition of foreign relationships, the prohibition of any enmity against other sovereignty of the great king. Vassal must answer a call to arms. The vassal must hold lasting and unlimited trust in the suzerain. The vassal must not give asylum to refugees from any source, and a vassal must appear before the suzerain once a year. Something really interesting that I read was that if the pagans, being polytheistic, having a whole bunch of gods, they wouldn't have been able to have a suzerain vassal covenant with a god because you can't have another suzerain. So if you're a vassal, you can only have one suzerain. So that's something pretty unique to Israel because Israel only has one God. So obviously you can't have a whole bunch of gods and then have a bunch of different suzerains. You can only have one suzerain. So the fact that Israel is monotheistic, it actually helps them to be able to have a suzerain vassal covenant because otherwise that's impossible. Imagine you have a covenant with Baal and then a covenant with Asherah. You can't have two suzerains. You can only have one. A suzerain can have a lot of vassals, but you can only have one suzerain. And then another really interesting is that the vassal must appear before the suzerain once a year. I think you guys can think of 3 examples of when that would happen, or if you remember the 3 pilgrimage feasts. Anybody has any mind? Yes. And
What's after Pesach? Shavuot?
Shavuot, yes. And you guys remember the other one?
The very last one.
Last one.
Literally the last one.
Sukkot.
Sukkot. Yes.
Yeah.
So there's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Those are the 3 pilgrimage feasts, and that's when people have to present themselves before Hashem once a year in Jerusalem. So good examples of stipulations would be the 10 Commandments, the Shema, basically anything from Deuteronomy 5:1 to 11:32. A lot of laws, and again, when you look at the structure of how covenants are done, it makes a lot of sense. So it's really interesting. We're going to look a little bit more at the chapter later. And then afterwards, we see provisions for the deposit of the text, plus public readings. This was something that was most of the time done in suzerain vassal covenants. So the treaty is put in the most sacred shrines of the chief gods of the 2 lands involved. This is in the regular people ones, for an obvious purpose, so that the gods could read it and be reminded from time to time of the provisions of the oath sworn in their presence. Because they wouldn't swear oaths just because, they would swear it in the presence of their gods or in the names of their gods. So this is why breaking oaths was such a big deal, because you invoke a god in your oath. That's a very huge thing, and that's why in the Torah you see that God says not to take God's name in vain, because what does it mean? You can't swear in his name in vain. You can't take an oath in God's name in vain, because then that will profane the name. And if you guys remember, the name has a lot to do with the honor of the person or God. So if you profane God's name, you're profaning his honor. And then if you see in Deuteronomy 10:1 to 2, it says that at that time the Lord said to me, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come up to me in the mountain. Also make a wooden ark. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. Then you are to put them in the ark. So do you guys know where the ark goes? Yes, in the Holy of Holies, exactly. So basically putting them in the ark, you're putting them in the temple. If you guys remember, the ark was kind of like the footstool of God. Yeah. And then we have the witnesses of the gods. This is going to be towards the end of Deuteronomy, on Deuteronomy 31. And then the curses and blessings, we'll look at them later once we get there. But it's really interesting because the Hittites, they were called the land of 1,000 gods because they had so many gods. So when you read those covenants, you're going to have a whole bunch of gods named. In Deuteronomy, it's a little bit different. Obviously, there's no God's name. So, witnesses of the gods, that was for them. For us, it's more like the heavens and the earth. And you'll see that, and you can read that portion. And it's going to be pretty clear on who witnesses are. But we're going to look a little bit at the Shema and the temple liturgy. It's very interesting. If you guys remember, we talked about the stipulations. In general, some stipulations that we can call out are the Ten Commandments and the Shema. Basically, anything from Deuteronomy 5:1 to 11:32. So we're going to look a little bit at something that's from the Mishnah. So if you want to think of the Mishnah, you can think about it in very extremely general term. But think of it as a temple manual, I guess if you want to call it something. So again, extremely general, there's a lot in the Mishnah, but in very general terms, you can call it a temple manual. Okay? Basically, there's a lot of things that were done in the temple. This is the collection of the oral traditions from the temple. They were compiled after the temple was destroyed. So it gives us a good idea, at least, of kind of what was done in the temple in general. Very helpful to read it about. Yes?
Who wrote the Mishnah?
It was a lot of different rabbis. I think it was it Yehuda Hanasi?
I remember it's rabbis.
Yes. But I don't think it wasn't one person.
No, because it was like a recorded hearing.
Yeah. So it wasn't just one person said that. I'm a repetition.
I mean, that's when you read it. It's like this rabbi said this,
Yeah.
this rabbi said that. It's like a court hearing.
Yeah. And then, if you guys remember, the Tamid offering. So the Tamid offering was the one that was done in the morning and in the afternoon. I always like to think about the Tamid as a parenthesis to the other offerings because it was basically what opened the temple and what closed the temple service-wise. They would do things before and they would do things after. But as far as sacrifices go, they would do a sacrifice in the morning to kick it off, starting with the Tamid, and to finish it off, they would do the Tamid in the evening. We're going to talk a little bit about the morning Tamid. Alright, so in the Second Temple period, the Shema appears to be an established liturgical custom. Every morning in the temple, the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and the Shema were recited along with the prayers of Emet Be'atzik. We're going to talk about that later too. So this is from the Mishnah, Tractate Tamid. There's a tractate where it goes through how they would have done the Tamid offering in the morning. It starts from the very beginning of the morning after they were finished. So basically, this is a little bit from that. It says that after the priest had completed laying the parts of the daily offering on the ram, it went to the chamber of hewstone, Mishkat Gazit, to recite the Shema. The appointed priest who oversaw the lauders in the temple said to the priest, "Recite a single blessing and the blessings that accompany the Shema." And the members of the priestly watch recited a blessing, and then they recited the Ten Commandments, the Shema, the Hayim Shamua, and Vayomer, and the standard formula of the Shema. So, yes.
How do they do the lots?
What?
How do they do the lots?
The lauders?
Yeah, like, how do they do it?
Okay, so they would stand in a circle, and then somebody would take off their hat, and then they would raise one or two fingers. Then they would pick a number, and they would count the fingers, and whoever gets that number would be the one picked. They would go through that, and then there would be a lottery in the morning, and then in the afternoon. So the morning Tamid, if you guys have ever heard of the Shacharit prayer or the Mikha prayer, these two prayers are in Judaism is done today. If you guys have heard Judaism, we pray 3 times a day. So once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once in the evening. The evening one, for a long time, was considered like optional. Until with time became more and more established. But originally, it was mostly these two. So these two are timed according to the morning and the afternoon Tamid offerings. The Shacharit prayer is the morning one. It's around 9 a.m.-ish, but people do it at different times in the morning. And then Mikha, which is what we do here at Roca Eterna. So these two, they're timed according to the Tamid. It's kind of like a way of continuing, a little bit of what we can do from the temple. Obviously, we're not doing any offerings or anything, but it's a symbolic act. So So, in the temple, they would have said those prayers during the Shacharit service, and it would have been during the first Tamid. So they would have said the Ten Commandments, they would have said the Shema, the famous one obviously, and then Hayam Shamu, that's the one that I read today. It's actually said right after the Shema, and then Vayomer is the one that in Numbers where it talks about the Tzitzit. So basically, you recite all of those. If you have any normal Orthodox Siddur, you can just look at the Shema section, and it's going to be that, not the Ten Commandments. It's going to be Shema, and Shema, and Vayomer, every Siddur. Like that's standard practice. And then the Ten Commandments, they used to say the Ten Commandments every day in the mornings. It's very interesting, but they actually stopped because there was at one point there was heretics. We talked about it in the Gemara, I think, where there were some heretics where they started saying that the Ten Commandments were the only inspired law, and they said that the rest of the Torah is not really from God. So to kind of combat those heretics, they stopped saying the Ten Commandments every day in the spaces. Because they used to say it every single day in the mornings. Like obviously, at the Tamid, they used to say the Ten Commandments and the Shema and all the other ones. So what I read is that they said, if you got from the citation, I looked it up earlier, where they said that like because of the heretics they had to stop. And then there's some people that say you could say it by yourself, but just not say it in front of everybody, just to not give those heretics like more power, I guess. So it's very interesting. And then additionally, they blessed the people with 3 blessings. These blessings were true and firm, and then the blessings of redemption recited after the Shema, and the blessing of the temple service, which is also a blessing recited in that prayer, and the priestly benediction. So what's really interesting is that we read this and we're like, okay, they said prayers. Yes.
Question. So this is is that quote on the right from the Mishnah?
Yes.
So the people who argue that they never did any prayers in the temple never read the Mishnah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then also the people that say that they never prayed in the temple haven't read the New Testament because.
Wow.
It says they pray, literally says they pray.
Yeah, I put it there. Let's see it. And then, so something really interesting is that the true and firm, those one in Yativ, those are actually still said in the exact same order in the Shaharit every single day in the morning at the same time. So it's really, really interesting. And then the other ones are said during the Amidah prayer. The Amidah prayer comes a little bit after, and the priestly benediction obviously the corresponding would say it. But those two, so they would say the Shema in the temple. They would have said the Ten Commandments. We already talked about why they stopped, and then they would have said the Shema. And then the 2 blessings that we still say today, right after those 2, in the exact same order, at the exact same time, roughly. So it's really interesting how it still keeps on going, because a lot of times we might look at the Siddur, and if you guys were here for Joseph Cook's teaching, that was like,
It was so
yes,
mind blowing.
but then it kind of teaches you also how liturgy is really important and how really cool liturgy was. And I was talking to my dad yesterday, and when we were talking because remember, it's not literal, but it's just a thought, food for thought. Where it says that you're supposed to meditate on God's word day and night. But liturgy is God's word. It's based on God's word. So in a way, when you're saying the prayers and everything, you're meditating on God's word day and night. You're just repeating it. And there's a lot of verses, and a lot of verses where like you can memorize verses just by saying like, a lot of people, you probably know the Shema by memory, like you just repeat it, doesn't matter. But there's a lot of things, and then there's a lot of things where it kind of clicks because you have them in your minds. Like even the songs that you guys sing, like we all sing according to a lot of verses. So it's just really cool. Very interesting. Yeah, and so I just think it's very cool how we see this and we see that it's still kept and people still do it. So it's not like some rabbis who sat down and they were like, you know what, I'm going to make a siddur, I'm going to make everybody pray every single day. No, this was something that was established for a long time. It's nothing new. And then, guess when these prayers are taken in order, again, we mentioned the 10 commandments in the Shaharit. So you can go to any siddur, even the ones that we have here, go to the morning services where it says the Shema, and you'll see them in the exact same way. It's really cool. So I would have been here during the Shaharit service in the morning Shaharit. And then, in the rabbinic tradition, the Shema testimony was defined as the acceptance of the yoke in the kingdom of heaven. So basically, Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim it was called. So basically, a type of loyalty oath, kind of an oath. And when you look at the Shema, when it's written in the scroll, if you look like where it's pointing there, and you see the last letter there is really big, and then at the end of the line, the letter is also really big. So that one's Ayin and Dalet. The first one is Shema, Had. But basically, those 2 letters that are really big, they spell Ed, which is a testimony, or a witness. Yes.
During the Shema, why do we over-exaggerate the D at the end?
Because if you say it with an R, because the D can look like an R. If you say it with an R, it means another. So So that's kind of the opposite of instead of saying God is one, you say God is another. That's kind of the opposite. So there's two theories as to why those two letters are bigger. One theory is to make sure we pronounce it very well, because if you don't pronounce the ayin in the beginning, and you don't pronounce the dalet in the end, it completely changes the Shema to totally opposite the meaning, like God is another one. Heresy. But then another theory is that it spells ed, which is a witness, or testimony, and Shema is a type of testimony. So it's just really interesting. And yeah, in the scroll, our scroll is going to look like that. Every traditional scroll is going to look like that. And then the idiom, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. So how we mentioned that the Shema in rabbinic tradition is called the acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Yoke is like the carga, that way. And then the idiom, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, is a conventional expression in Akkadian for fulfilling one's duties to the king. So again, none of this is new. And it's really, so that's according to Moshe Marco. So interesting as well. And then the acceptance of the yoke means, in fact, taking a pledge of loyalty. And this turned into the most important liturgy during the Second Temple period. And so if you guys have seen the tefillin, the ones, there's one like you go in here, and one I think it's on the left arm or right arm, depends on what arm you use most. So the tefillin of Qumran, do you guys know what Qumran is? No. Okay, so Qumran is like, they found scrolls, and there was a community of Jews. A lot of people call them the Essenes. And there was just a community in the first century, a little bit before and a little bit after. And so we learned a lot from Second Temple Judaism from what we found there. They had a lot of scrolls and a lot of items, and some of the things that found is that they found tefillin. It was really interesting because it's evidence that during the time of Yeshua they would have used tefillin as well. It's not something that was invented yesterday. So yes.
What are tefillin?
So tefillin is what we use for prayers in the morning. We don't use them here because the Shabbat is not used. So they have one here, and then depending if you're right-handed or left-handed, one on an arm. And then inside of them, there's 4 texts. Included in the texts, in the ones that they found in Qumran, is the 10 Commandments and the Shema also. And it testifies to the fact that the Shema liturgy was a prevalent custom during the Second Temple period. It's actually the thing that they found from there. It looks kind of different, but you gotta think they're really, really old. And things have developed, but you see the 4 little sections for the 4 texts, and there's still those 4 texts today. If you guys want to know more tefillin, my dad knows more than I do. So I'm not an expert, but this is just like the general information. And then Papas, during which temple period did Yeshua live? The first or second temple?
Give your best.
Yes, the second temple. So again, all these things are evidence for the second temple period. The same thing for the Mishnah. So it's really interesting. So Yeshua would have probably done all of these things too. And then Yeshua also mentioned the Shema. Again, if anybody wants to say that Torah is done away with, Yeshua quotes the Torah all of the time. And it says that one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Yeshua had given them a good answer, he asked, of all the commandments, which one is the most important? And then he said, the most important one, answered Yeshua, is this. Shema Yisrael, obviously, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So again, what does it mean to love God? We're going to talk about that later. So. And then this is a verse that we're talking about, how Peter and John went to the temple at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the hour of prayer. So there. So 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the hour of prayer. So again, they would have gone during the Tamid service.
Also, when Zechariah went inside the temple, it says that they were praying on the outside.
Yes, exactly. So again, if people want to pretend that nobody prayed during the temple, they haven't read the New Testament, okay? So there's just a lot of things that we don't know. I didn't know this existed until like maybe last year, and I thought it was really cool, and I was like, no way, it says that there. Because a lot of people, they just have a misconception about the New Testament, but there's a lot of things that they go with the mission and all that. So just the main points to remember from this section: the Shema and the accompanied prayers, basically all the ones we went through there. You can read it in the Siddur. They were said every morning in the temple, and then the Shema is considered the acceptance of the yoke of heaven, and it's considered a pledge of loyalty. And then the tefillin, the thing of phylacteries, in English, are found in Qumran. They contain the Shema, just like the ones used today. So again, none of this is new. And just like we saw with Joseph Good, this is all like ancient traditions, and sure, it might have evolved with time. The liturgy we have today, it might have evolved a little bit, but that doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of it is very close and very interesting. Now we're gonna talk about love, okay? So it's not what it sounds like. So the words rus with words with the root ahav, aleph, hey, bet. Love appear in Deuteronomy roughly 23 times. Okay? So, we see a few verses in Deuteronomy. You're going to see this word all over the place. So, it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors. It also says, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. Because he loved your forefathers, and he chose their seed after them, and he brought you out of Egypt before him with his great strength. And, Deuteronomy 11:1, therefore you shall love the Lord your God, keep his charge, his statutes, his ordinances, his commandments, all the days. So again, a lot of love, but what does it mean, right? Obviously, the Shema we're just talking about, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. Okay, what does it mean, love? Does that mean we have to be all emotional and be like, oh my gosh, I love God, and like cry about it all the time? That's not what it means. Because modern Western love is very based on emotions and affection, but in the ancient Near Eastern love, especially in political treaties and treaty language, it had to do with actions and commitment to covenants and oaths and vows. So whenever you hear love in Deuteronomy, think loyalty, quite literally loyalty. So the love of God is a peculiar stress of Deuteronomy, and a still more remarkable instance of the book's conservation of very old covenant ideas. And then to love Hashem is linked inseparably with to serve him. So know that Hashem your God is the one God, the faithful God who keeps the covenant and the faith with those who love him and keep his commandments for 1,000 generations, right? So what does that mean for those who love him? Like the people that are really emotional about him. What if you're not a crier? What if you don't really feel really emotional about it, because emotions fluctuate. So this is not what it's talking about there. So love in Deuteronomy can be commanded. But if Deuteronomy is referring to an emotion, how can you command an emotion, right? So like a lot of times people will tell you like, oh, you're supposed to feel this way. Like you're probably gonna feel the other way. Because again, when people tell you to feel something, it's kind of a weird thing. Yes.
So what about during Sukkot we're supposed to be joyful?
That is very interesting. But I don't know if it has something to do with this.
What was the question?
During Sukkot, yeah, that's something I was thinking about.
I'm sorry?
Like when it says Sukkot that you're supposed to be happy.
Oh, yeah, I said that was interesting.
Alright, so then the language of the use of love in the language of diplomacy is found in the archives of El Amarna. The relation that exists between brothers in a treaty is love.
Oh, that was the cereal.
Yeah, it looks like a sentimental scrunch.
I literally just went, I was about to say,
Or
my
the
sister
other
said it
one,
looks like
the old sweets.
Yeah, I was like, why is there a piece of cereal?
My sister just said that yesterday. I was about to tell you. I was like, it looks like cereal. So yeah, so that's one of the from the El Amarna archives. Basically, El Amarna letters are from the time of King Tut's dad. You guys know like King Tut, the famous pharaoh. His dad, basically, it's a whole drama. He was a heretic. He wasn't a monotheist. It was more complicated than that, but people say it was like monotheist-ish, but not really. Basically, his dad, he changed the capital of Egypt to Amarna, El Amarna. And then they found there in Tel El Amarna, they found a lot of letters of like political treaties and political kind of talks between him and like Hittites and other nations around there in Akkadian. So basically those letters, they just give us a great idea, like a general idea of how treaties were done back then, like political talk between those people. Just gives us a great idea of the political language in that time. So in those letters, that guy's, Akhenaton was his name. He's a very interesting guy. Weird. His hieroglyphics are really weird, like Google it, it's weird. So basically it's a quote from the El Amarna letter. So, may my brother preserve love towards me 10 times more than he did his father, and we will go on loving my brother fervently. So again, this sounds very emotional, but this is politics. This is not emotional, okay? And when it says brother, it's talking about his covenant partner. It's not talking about his literal brother, because then more than his father. Our father. And then we see, if the king, my lord, loves his faithful servant, let him send back the 3 men. Again, if he loves his faithful servant, doesn't mean if he's emotional, no. If he's loyal to his faithful servant. And then there's a city in Lebanon called Byblos. It uses love to describe the divided loyalties of a rebellious city. Basically a city that was like in chaos. And there was like a rebellion going on. So just a quote from that, it says that behold the city, half of it loves the son of Abdi Ashirta, and half of it loves my Lord, right? So half of it is they're loyal to Abdi Ashirta, and half of it is loyal to my Lord. So here you see again how much the word love is used, but it's used in the context of loyalty. And then this is a great example. The vassal treaties of King Esarhaddon. This is one of the emperors of Assyria. And it said that you will love Ashurbanipal as yourselves, right? So you look at this, and you think Ashurbanipal is kind of like sad, like please love me, like please love me. But that's not what it is. Okay.
But did you know what's the background behind that?
Grey's Anatomy episode?
No. The last image. Like, why are they like begging in chains?
I'm not sure about that
Concept.
specifically, but they would do a lot of descriptions of how they're like really strong.
Is that a
Interesting.
king?
Yeah,
Is
that's Ashurbanipal.
And I guess 2 kids. Just
I
kinda
guess.
sad.
Yeah. And then, so, but again, for context, Ashurbanipal says you have to love me as yourself. Please love me. That's not what it means.
It's an actual line.
Yes! It's a whole scene.
But yeah, but Ashurbanipal is actually one of the most brutal Assyrian kings in terms of the variety of scenes depicted. He's one of the 4 Neo-Assyrian kings to have in their inscriptions claimed to have killed civilians, and the one with the most varied acts against them, including life laying, dismemberment, and impalement. Seems like a nice guy. There are also several instances where he's recorded to have brought captive enemies to Nineveh, also the capital, to enthusiastically torture and humiliate them.
He has so much love. That's what
Yeah, exactly. So this guy was not an emotional person, as you guys can tell. Not the most loving, needy person. So when it says you have to love Ashurbanipal as yourself, it wouldn't say love if it meant an emotion. That would be kind of embarrassing for him. It means loyalty. So you have to say you have to be loyal to Ashurbanipal as you are loyal to yourselves. So again, this is a great context as to what the word love means. And again, it's not talking about emotion, it's talking about loyalty, because this guy would not be this.
I probably said it in an angry voice too.
Yeah, exactly. Very full. So then when we look at the Shema now, we have to love the Lord your God with all your heart. What does it mean to love God? It means to be loyal to God, right? And how are we loyal to God? By keeping the Torah. So that's what it means to love God. It's not to be all emotional, because sometimes our emotions are going to fluctuate all of the time because we're human beings. So it's not commanding you to be in a certain emotion all the time. It's talking about loyalty. You have to be loyal to God. And then this phrase, with all your heart, going back to the cinnamon toast crunch tablets. There's more to me. So in the
It looks like arms and legs now.
I want to eat it. Oh my god, they have arms and legs.
They don't see those characters.
yeah,
The commercials.
exactly.
It looks like cookies.
So I think I would have baked them too. Like they were baked clay sheets.
Yeah.
They were
So
They were.
they were cookies.
So,
So then the Elamar and the letters, like the ones we were talking about in that big archive that they found, it's really interesting. If you guys can like Google the Elamar and the letters, it's really, really cool. A lot of stuff that we learned from there. So it speaks of serving a superior king with all your heart. Again, you have to love the Lord with all your heart. These would have been from like roughly around the, I would say, 500-year range of the Exodus. I don't want to narrow it down or anything, but it'll be from around that time. So again, this is treaty loyalty from that time, and it said that you have to love your a superior king with all your heart. And this phrase is especially characteristic of the Deuteronomic style. And then this is another mark of Deuteronomy's saturation with treaty language. The stipulation found repeatedly in this treatise is what the vassal must fight for his Lord with all of his heart. I didn't put this here, but there was another quote from another inscription back in the day. I think it was almost 100% sure from the Hittite. And it said that you have to come to help me with all your chariots, with all your heart. What does it mean with all your heart? Again, he was calling him to arms to come fight for him in a physical battle, but he has to come with all his heart. Again, that's like with everything, with all his strength. His strength means his chariots and everything. To us it means kind of different because we have chariots, but you get the idea. So, with that out of the way, we're going to look at the New Covenant. This book is so good. I really like this one section, and I'll talk about this section right now. So good. So, everybody knows Jeremiah 31 to 33, very famous, quoted all of the time, where it says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their forefathers on the day which I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke. Though I was their husband, declares the Lord, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel in those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people." When you hear hearts in the ancient Near Eastern kind of context, it means brain. Like when it says the heart, that's why you hear the phrase a lot in Hebrew where like he thought in his heart. Like if you hear in the Bible, you're gonna read he thought in his heart. because basically the heart was the seat of intelligence. That's where intelligence would have come from. So again, it kind of changes the perspective of what that means. And then Yeshua obviously said, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for remission of sins." But what does it mean, a new covenant? That means we can eat bacon now. Yay! That's exciting. I've never had pork bacon, so I don't really care. But a lot of people might be really excited about that because it's a new covenant. So finally, right? Nor. So the key theological question. The key question is, in what sense is each covenant in the Bible a new covenant?
What does that mean?
Like, what does that mean? What is a new covenant?
Renewed.
Exactly, maybe. But it can still be new. So the Noah covenant was between God and all living things. Then God cut a covenant with Abraham. So it could certainly be considered as new, right? The promise of the land and the descendants are new, and the sign of circumcision is new, right? So there was a covenant between God and Noah before. And then there was a new covenant with Abraham, the circumcision, the land, the descendants. That was not in the Noah covenant. But does that mean that the Noah covenant is done away with? No. It was technically a new covenant. It was brand new, but it doesn't do away with the old one either. So nowhere does the biblical tradition understand the covenant between Abraham as nullifying the one between Noah, right? And then the Sinai covenant is new, but nowhere does the biblical tradition understand the Sinai covenant as nullifying the Abraham covenant, right? So technically, in the context of that time, before Abraham, it was a new covenant, but it didn't get rid of the Abrahamic covenant. It actually supposed that the Abraham covenant was still there. In most of the Bible, the two are actually referenced together as if the Sinai covenant supplements the Abrahamic covenant. So it was a new covenant, but it didn't get rid of the old one, because we can have multiple covenants, and you don't have to get rid of one or the other. And then the same thing with Pinchas, or Phineas. So he was given a brit kehunat olam, eternal covenant of priesthood. But this was after the Torah was given in Sinai. This was a new covenant. Does that mean that we get rid of the Torah? No, because it's a new covenant in addition to the old ones, right? So it doesn't mean that the other ones go out of use. So again, olam, forever. So forever until there's another covenant, or forever, right? Forever. And then does the new covenant then, knowing this, does the new covenant nullify the covenant with Pinchas or the one with Aaron?
No.
No, exactly. So it's this is technically a new covenant, but it's still there. The other ones are still there. So it doesn't mean that this one is better than the other one. It's just new, but it's not instead of. And then David's covenant is new. So again, David came hundreds of years after the Torah was given. The covenant with him that he was going to have a royal dynasty forever is new. It was a new covenant, but it doesn't get rid of the Torah. And it doesn't get rid of the priesthood covenant. It doesn't get rid of the Noah covenant. It doesn't get rid of the Abrahamic covenant. It doesn't get rid of any of that. And it's still new. And then the same thing. So with the length of the king's reign depends on obedience to the Sinai covenant. And it will be when he sits on his throne that he shall write for himself 2 copies of this Torah on a scroll. From that the Torah which is before the Levitical Hanim, priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord, his God, to keep all the words of this Torah and these statutes to perform them. Again, does that mean there's going to be a new covenant with David and everything else we can do? No, it's a new covenant, but it's in addition to the other ones. And then so it's clear that when Jeremiah characterizes the covenant as new, it does not mean that it nullifies the earlier ones. So it's not a new covenant instead of the other ones, just another one. Just like Noah, when Abraham was a new covenant, doesn't mean that God is going to flood the earth now because he made a covenant with Noah. Because if we're going to be with the mindset that whenever there's a new covenant, we're going to get rid of the old ones, then the earth could get literally flooded tomorrow and, goodbye us. But thank goodness that God's covenants are forever. So he can have multiple covenants. Yes.
No, well, I was going to say that in Deuteronomy it adds laws in regards to the temple, because when they go into the land, the temple's going to be in a fixed location. But in the Sinai covenant, everything revolves around the tabernacle. So there's a change, not because the other one's getting rid of, but because something different is going to happen. So I think that's kind of what's happening in Jeremiah.
Yeah, exactly. So think of it like, I guess, an updated covenant.
Yeah.
It's an update, like a new software update. It doesn't get rid of all the old stuff. You just, like an iPhone update. If you guys have iPhones, as you should. Sorry. So like there's a new update. It's not gonna get because there's a new update, there's just gonna be cooler stuff added, but it doesn't get rid of the other ones, right? It's still there. So whoever asks, no, you cannot eat bacon. I'm sorry.
Turkey bacon?
Turkey bacon, yes, please, have fun. Yes, I can tell you where to get good kosher turkey. So basically, as a review of everything we talked about today, Deuteronomy is structured as a Suzerain Vassal Covenant, and we saw that at the beginning with the structure, the general structure. Not all Suzerain Vassal Covenants are going to have all of those things. Some might not have one or two of those like things, like one of the 6 things in the list, but Deuteronomy has all of them. And then the 10 Commandments, the Shema, and its accompanying blessing were recited during the morning Talmud service. I mean, we don't see the 10 Commandments anymore because there was heritage. I didn't know this until this week. That was really cool. So they took that off because people were saying 10 Commandments is the only Torah, and it sounds like some people. And then the Shema is a pledge of loyalty. And then love is a legal and political term for loyalty. And then that also can help us, nowadays, even though you don't have to think about legal political terms, but in modern times we think of love as very emotional, but it's very loyalty related. And obviously, if you tell somebody that you love them, but then you don't help them out when they need you, you really love them? Probably not. And then the new covenant does not mean a nullification of the previous covenants. So just in addition to the old ones. And that's why I also have a problem calling it the Old Testament. When you say the New Testament, the Old Testament is like, it's done, it's like it's old. It makes it seem like it's outdated or old, but it's still there. Everything is still there. And thanks.
I have a question. So let's say somebody asks, what's the significance of comparing the structure of the covenant with Deuteronomy? What's the big deal? What am I supposed to take from it? Why is that important?
I would say, there's a lot of answers, but I guess you can understand why it was written because, for example, if I write via a letter and I tell her inside jokes, but if people don't understand who I'm writing to and what style I'm writing to, they're not going to understand what I mean, right? So there's a lot of different also formats in how you write. I can write a text message, I can write an email, I can write an article, but if you don't understand how an email is structured, you're probably not going to get the whole point. You're going to be like, why is there a name here? Why is there a name here? Why is this? What's going on? So to understand Deuteronomy better, we have to understand what's the format that it was written in. Is it an email form? Is it a text? Or is it a Suzerain Vassal Covenant? It's a Suzerain Vassal Covenant. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I would say it really emphasizes the legality of Deuteronomy and like how not serious, but it's pretty serious. How serious it is.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh hey, by the way, don't forget about this. No, it's structured a